I don't believe in things I can't control, and that's exactly why this started to feel like a problem the moment the door opened on its own. Every night at exactly 11, I lock it myself, steel bolt sliding into place, digital panel flashing green, the quiet click echoing through a room no one else is allowed to enter. Because control isn't just a habit for me, it's survival. It's the reason my name means something in the city. It's the reason people don't ask questions they don't want answered. And yet 3 nights ago, I woke up at 2:17 a.m. with the kind of silence that feels wrong, like the air is waiting for something, and there it was, the door slightly open, just enough to let the hallway light spill across the floor like a line I didn't remember crossing, and I stood there for a full minute, listening, counting my own breathing, expecting something, someone, but there was nothing, no footsteps, no voices, no movement, just that door, open like it had never been locked at all. So I checked the cameras every angle, every second, rewinding frame by frame until my eyes burned, and nothing changed, no one entered, no one left, the system didn't glitch, it didn't even hesitate, it just showed me the truth I didn't want, that the door had opened without permission, without cause, without explanation. So I replaced the lock the next day, upgraded everything, doubled security, because that's what I do when something threatens control. I eliminate variables, I close gaps, I make sure there is no space left for mistakes. But the next night at 2:17, it happened again, same silence, same wrong feeling. Same door, open, and this time something else was different. A glass on my desk, heavy, crystal, the kind that doesn't move unless someone touches it, had shifted, maybe an inch, maybe less, but I knew exactly where I left it, I always know, and that was the moment something cold settled in my chest. Not fear, I don't call it that, but something close enough to make me stop pretending this was just a malfunction. Because malfunctions don't repeat like that, they don't wait for the same minute. They don't move things that shouldn't move, and they definitely don't make a man like me question what he already knows. And that's when they suggested bringing someone in, an outsider, a specialist, someone who deals with things that don't fit into normal explanations, and I almost said no, because I don't invite strangers into my world. I don't let anyone see the parts one keep locked away. But then I looked at that door again, still slightly open, like it was waiting for me to admit something I wasn't ready to face, and for the first time in years, I realized control might not be enough, so I said yes, and that's how Emily Carter walked into my house, like she already knew the way. She did not ask for permission when she stepped further into the room, and that alone should have been enough for me to end the conversation right there, because in my world, every step is measured, every boundary is enforced, but Emily Carter moved like boundaries were suggestions, like walls were just temporary ideas someone forgot to question, and I watched her cross the polished floor slowly, her eyes scanning everything without touching anything, like she was reading the room instead of inspecting it, and that bothered me more than it should have, because people usually react to this place in one of two ways. They either look impressed or they look afraid, but she did neither. She just observed, calm, steady, like she was trying to remember something she had never been told, and I kept my distance, arms crossed, measuring her the same way I measure every risk, every unknown variable that steps into my life, waiting for her to make a mistake, to say something that proves she does not belong here. But instead she stopped right in the center of the room, turned slightly and looked at the door behind me, not at the lock, not at the frame, but at the space itself, like she was listening to something I could not hear, and when she spoke, her voice was quiet, controlled, the kind of calm that does not come from confidence but from certainty. She said, "You are watching the door like it is the problem." And I did not answer because I wanted to hear where she was going with it, and she continued, "But the door is just reacting." And something in my chest tightened at that word, reacting, like this room was alive, like it had a reason, and I almost laughed it off, almost reminded her who she was talking to, but then she took one more step forward and the air shifted again, that same wrong silence pressing in from all sides, and I felt it before I saw it, the subtle click behind me, soft, precise, undeniable, and I turned slowly, not rushing because I do not rush. I control, I assess, but there it was, the door completely closed now. Sealed tight, the digital panel glowing steady green like nothing had ever been wrong, and for a moment neither of us spoke because whatever this was, it was not random, it was not broken, it was responding, and I looked back at her, really looked this time, noticing the way her gaze had not moved, the way her breathing stayed even, like she expected this, like she had been waiting for it, and that was when the realization hit, quiet but sharp, that maybe she was not here to fix the problem. Maybe she was part of it, and before I could stop myself, I asked the one question I never ask anyone, the one question that gives away more than it should. "Have you ever been in this room before?" And for the first time since she walked in, she hesitated, just a fraction of a second, just enough for me to see it, before she met my eyes and said, "No." But her voice carried something underneath it, something familiar, something that made the back of my mind stir with a memory I could not fully reach, like a name I almost remembered, like a past I thought I had locked away. And the worst part was not that I did not believe her. It was that part of me did, and that part scared me more than the door ever could. The room stayed quiet after she answered, but it was not the kind of quiet that brings relief. It was the kind that presses against your thoughts until you start hearing things you did not notice before, like the faint hum of the security panel, like the soft shift of air against the walls, like the space itself was reacting to the fact that she was still standing there, and I could not ignore it anymore. The way everything seemed to settle when she entered, like whatever had been happening was not trying to get in, it was trying to reach her. And that idea should have sounded irrational, impossible even, but nothing about the past 3 nights had followed logic. And I have learned that when logic fails, instinct takes over, and my instinct was telling me she was not just connected to this. She was the center of it. So I stepped closer, slow, deliberate, watching for any change in her expression, any flicker that would confirm what I was starting to believe. But she held steady, her eyes moving across the room again, lingering on details most people would never notice, the edges of the desk, the pattern in the wood floor, the faint discoloration near the far wall where sunlight never quite reached. And then she did something that made my pulse shift just slightly. She walked toward that wall without hesitation, like she knew exactly where she was going, and I felt it. Before I understood it, that subtle tightening in my chest, that quiet recognition you cannot explain but cannot ignore, like watching someone walk through a memory you did not realize you still carried. And when she stopped, she did not touch anything. She just looked down, her head tilting slightly as if something beneath the surface had caught her attention, and I followed, my gaze dropping to the same spot, and for a second I saw nothing, just polished wood, perfectly maintained, exactly as it should be, until she spoke again, softer this time, almost to herself. "There is something here," and I felt that word again, here, like she was not discovering it but remembering it, and without thinking I moved to the desk, pulling open the bottom drawer, reaching for the small tool I keep for situations that require precision, because whatever this was, I needed to see it clearly. And as I knelt down and pressed against the edge of the panel, there was a faint shift, barely noticeable, but enough to reveal a thin seam I had never seen before, hidden perfectly within the design, something that had always been there but never mattered until now. And when I finally eased it open, slow, controlled, the way I approach everything, I saw it. A small carved marking, worn with time but still unmistakable, a symbol I had not thought about in years, not since a chapter of my life I made sure stayed closed. And the moment I recognized it, I felt something cold settle in place, not fear, not exactly, but something heavier, something that carried weight, memory, consequence, and I turned my head toward her, expecting surprise, confusion, anything that would match what I was feeling, but instead she was already looking at it, already understanding it, her expression calm in a way that made everything else feel unstable, and when she finally spoke, her voice steady, certain, it did not sound like a question. It sounded like a truth that had been waiting too long to surface. "I have seen this before." And in that moment, I realized the door was never the mystery, it was the message, and she was the reason it kept opening. The symbol should not have meant anything anymore, not after all these years, not after everything I had buried under layers of decisions I never allowed myself to revisit, but the moment she said she had seen it before, something shifted in a way I could not control, like a locked part of my mind had just been forced open without permission, and I stood there longer than I should have, staring at that small carving like it held more power than anything in this room, more than the locks, more than the systems, more than me, and I forced myself to stand, to regain that distance I rely on, because distance is clarity and clarity is control. But even as I stepped back, she stepped closer, not touching the panel, just observing it with that same quiet focus that made everything feel deliberate, and I realized she was not reacting, she was recognizing, and that difference mattered more than I wanted it to. So I asked, my voice steady, measured, "Where?" And she did not answer right away. her eyes still fixed on the symbol like she was aligning it with something in her memory, something just out of reach. And when she finally spoke, it was slower, more careful, like each word had weight. I do not know exactly, but it feels familiar, like a place I was not supposed to remember. And that sentence landed harder than anything else she had said, because forgetting is not accidental. Forgetting is usually forced, chosen, or taken, and I know that better than most, and I studied her again, really studied her, the way I would assess any unknown factor that could disrupt my world, looking for signs, inconsistencies, anything that would give me an advantage. But all I found was that same calm certainty, that same unsettling sense that she was not here by coincidence. And the room seemed to agree, the silence returning in that heavy way that made every second feel stretched, like something was waiting for the next move, and I turned back toward the door, watching it like I had every night, expecting something, anything, but it stayed closed, perfectly still, like it had nothing left to prove, and that was when the pattern became impossible to ignore. The door opened when she was not here, it stayed closed when she was, and whatever force had been acting on this space was not random, it was selective, it was intentional, and it was centered around her, and the realization settled in slowly but completely, like a truth I could not dismiss no matter how much I wanted to. So I made a decision I do not make lightly. I removed the last layer of control I had been holding on to, and I said, "You're staying." Not as a question, not as a suggestion, but as a fact, because if this room was responding to her, then she was no longer an outsider. She was part of the system now, part of whatever this was becoming, and she looked at me then, really looked, and for the first time there was something different in her expression, not fear, not hesitation, but recognition, like she had been expecting that answer all along, and she nodded once, slow, deliberate, and said, "I know," and those two words carried more certainty than anything else in the room, more than the locks, more than the cameras, more than my control. And for the first time since this started, I understood something clearly. This was not about keeping something out, it was about facing something that had been waiting to come back. That night, I did not leave the room, and that alone should tell you how far this had already gone, because I do not wait. I do not sit still for something I cannot define. But Emily remained there like it was the most natural place in the world, moving slowly through the space, her fingers brushing just above surfaces without touching them, like she was tracing something invisible, something only she could feel, and I stayed near the door, watching, measuring every step, every breath, because whatever this was, it had already shifted the balance. And I needed to understand it before it understood me. And the clock moved past midnight without either of us speaking, the silence thick but not empty, more like it was building toward something, and I checked the panel again, not because I doubted it, but because routine grounds you when everything else starts to slip. 11 locked, 12 still locked, 1 still locked, and then 2:17 approached, that exact moment that had repeated itself for 3 nights. The time I could not explain, the time I had started to anticipate whether I wanted to or not. And I felt it before it happened, that subtle shift in the air, that quiet pressure that made everything feel just slightly out of place, and my eyes moved to the door automatically, waiting, calculating, expecting the same pattern to repeat. But this time Emily did not look at the door. She was standing near the far wall again, right above, where the hidden symbol rested beneath the floor panel. And she closed her eyes for just a second, like she was listening to something deeper than sound, and then the click came, soft, precise, undeniable, but it was not behind me, it was in front of me, and I turned, fast enough to break my own rule about control, and saw the panel by the door flicker once, just once before the lock disengaged on its own, the bolt sliding back without any command, and the door slowly opened, inch by inch, the hallway light cutting across the floor, exactly like before, but this time it did not feel random. It felt directed, like it was happening because she was here, not in spite of it, and I looked back at her expecting surprise, but she was already watching me, her expression steady, almost sad in a way that did not make sense, and she said quietly, "It is not trying to get out," and something in her tone made me stop, made me listen in a way I had not allowed myself to before, and she continued, "It is trying to show you something," and that word settled into the space between us. Show, not break, not escape, but reveal, and I felt that same memory stirring again, closer this time, clearer, like something I had locked away was pushing back, demanding to be seen, and I stepped toward the doorway slowly, each movement deliberate, controlled, even as something deeper pulled at me, something I could not name but could not ignore, and the hallway beyond looked exactly the same, nothing out of place, nothing unusual, but the air felt different, like crossing that threshold would mean crossing into something I had spent years avoiding, and behind me, Emily spoke again, softer now, almost like a warning. "You already know what it is." And I froze. Just for a second, because the worst part was not that I did not know, it was that part of me did, and I had been choosing not to see it until now. I stood there at the edge of the doorway longer than I should have, longer than any man in my position ever allows himself to hesitate, because hesitation creates weakness, and weakness invites consequences. But this was not about fear. It was about recognition, the kind that settles in your chest before your mind can catch up, and Emily's voice lingered behind me, quiet but certain, like she had already seen what I was about to face, and I stepped forward, crossing the threshold into the hallway with the same controlled precision I have used my entire life. But everything felt different the moment I did, the air slightly colder, the silence deeper, like the space itself was shifting to accommodate something I had not acknowledged until now, and I turned back once, just once, to look at her, expecting her to follow, but she stayed exactly where she was, standing in the room, watching me with that same steady expression, like this part was mine to face alone. And that realization landed heavier than anything else, because whatever this was, it was not about the room, it was about me, and I continued down the hallway slowly, my steps measured, my eyes scanning every detail, every shadow, every reflection in the polished surfaces, searching for something out of place, something that would explain what had been happening. But everything looked exactly as it should, the same architecture, the same lighting, the same controlled environment I had designed myself. And yet the feeling did not leave. It followed me, subtle but constant, like a presence just out of sight. And then I noticed it, not immediately, not all at once, but gradually, like a memory forming piece by piece, the faint outline on the far wall, barely visible under the lighting, something I had passed by 1,000 times without ever truly seeing, and I slowed, my focus narrowing, my breathing steady but sharper now, because that shape was not random, it was deliberate, and as I stepped closer, it became clearer, a mark, almost identical to the one hidden beneath the floor in the room behind me, worn, faded, but unmistakable, and the moment I recognized it, the past I had kept buried for years pressed forward with a clarity I could not ignore anymore, because this was not just a symbol, it was a connection, a link to something I had chosen to forget, and I reached out, stopping just short of touching it, my hand hovering in the air as if crossing that final inch would confirm everything I was not ready to admit, and behind me, from the distance of the room, Emily's voice carried again, softer this time, but more certain than ever. "You built this place to hide it," and I closed my eyes for a second, just a second, because she was right. Not about the walls, not about the structure, but about the intention, the reason it existed in the first place. And when I opened them again, the symbol in front of me felt less like a discovery and more like a reminder, something that had always been here, waiting, and the realization settled in with a quiet weight I could not push away, that this was never about something entering my world. It was about something I had left unfinished, something that had found its way back, and for the first time since this began, I understood that control was never going to be enough to stop it, because you cannot lock away something that was never truly gone. I did not touch the symbol, not yet, because there are moments when instinct tells you that action is not control, restraint is, and I stood there with my hands suspended in the air, feeling something I had not felt in years, not uncertainty, but recognition layered with consequence, the kind that does not disappear just because you choose not to look at it. And behind me the silence stretched longer than before, not empty, not passive, but expectant, like the space itself was waiting for me to finally acknowledge what had always been there. And I lowered my hand slowly, stepping back instead of forward, because I needed distance to think, even if thinking was no longer giving me the answers I wanted. And that was when the realization sharpened into something undeniable. This was not just about the past. It was about how the past had been built into this place, hidden in the structure, woven into the design in ways I had convinced myself were just details, just architecture, just choices made without meaning. But nothing I do is without meaning, nothing I build is accidental. And if that symbol existed here, and in the room behind me, then I had put it there even if I did not remember doing it, even if I had convinced myself it was something else. And the thought settled heavy, because forgetting something like that is not natural. It is deliberate, and I turned, walking back toward the room with slower steps now, each one measured but different because I was not just returning to where I started. I was returning with understanding I did not have before, and when I crossed back through the doorway, Emily had not moved, still standing near the wall, still watching, like she knew exactly what I had just seen, exactly what I had just realized, and that calm in her expression did not feel reassuring. It felt inevitable, like everything was unfolding the way it was supposed to, and I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the slight tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes held mine without hesitation, and I asked the question I had been avoiding, not because I did not want the answer, but because I already understood what it might be. Why does this feel familiar to you? And this time she did not hesitate at all. She did not look away. She did not soften the truth. She just answered, steady, direct, because it is. And something in the way she said it broke through the last barrier I had been holding on to. Because familiarity does not come from coincidence. It comes from connection, from history, from something shared whether you remember it or not. And I studied her again, not as a stranger now, not as a variable, but as a piece of something larger, something I had not allowed myself to reconstruct until now. And I saw it, not in clear detail, not fully formed, but enough, a memory at the edge of recognition, a place, a different structure, older, smaller, a version of this space before it became what it is now. And a figure standing in that memory, not fully visible, not completely defined, but present in a way that mattered. And the more I focused on it, the more the pieces began to align, the symbol, the room, the hidden panel, the way she moved through this space like it belonged to her, and the truth settled in with a quiet certainty that did not need confirmation. This was not the first time she had been here, not in this exact form, not in this exact moment, but in a way that connected everything I had tried to separate, and I took a step closer, my voice lower now, more controlled, but carrying something deeper than before, something I could not ignore anymore. You are not here by accident. And she held my gaze unshaken, and for the first time there was no distance between what she knew and what I was beginning to understand, and she said softly, "Neither are you." And in that moment, I realized this was never about discovering something new. It was about remembering something I had chosen to forget. The moment she said that, something inside me shifted in a way that no system, no lock, no decision I had ever made could contain, because there is a difference between hearing the truth and recognizing it, and I was no longer standing on the side of denial. I was standing in the middle of something I had already been part of, something I had chosen to forget, because remembering would have meant changing everything that came after, and I took another step closer to her, not out of instinct this time, but out of necessity, because distance was no longer giving me control, it was keeping me blind, and I needed to see clearly now, needed to understand what had been hidden beneath layers I had built myself, and I studied her face again. Slower this time, not as a stranger, not as a threat, but as a reflection of something I had lost access to, and the details began to align in a way that felt inevitable, not sudden, not forced, but like pieces returning to where they had always belonged. The way she moved through this space, the way she recognized the symbol without hesitation, the way the room responded to her presence, not randomly, not violently, but precisely, intentionally, like it had been waiting for her to return, and that word settled in my mind with a weight I could not ignore. Return, because you do not return to a place you have never been, and I felt the memory again, closer now, sharper, not fully formed but no longer distant, a smaller version of this structure, unfinished, raw, before it became what it is now. And in that version there were fewer walls, fewer barriers, and a different kind of silence, not controlled, not designed, but real, and I saw movement in that memory, not clearly, not in full detail, but enough to understand there had been more than just me, more than just decisions made in isolation, and I exhaled slowly, steadying myself not because I was losing control, but because control was no longer the point, understanding was, and I spoke again, quieter now, but more direct than before. You are here, and it was not a question, it was a conclusion. Something I had already reached even if I did not want to say it out loud, and she did not deny it. She did not hesitate. She just nodded once, small, deliberate, like acknowledging something that had always been true whether I remembered it or not, and she said, "Not like this, but yes." And that answer carried more weight than anything else because it confirmed what I had been resisting, that this connection was not new, it was unresolved, and I felt the structure around us differently now, not as a fortress, not as something I controlled, but as something that had been built around a truth I had avoided, something that had been waiting beneath the surface until it could no longer stay hidden, and I turned slightly, looking back at the door, still open, still silent, and for the first time it did not feel like a breach. It felt like an invitation, and behind me, Emily's voice came again, softer but steady. You did not just build this place to hide it, and I did not need her to finish the sentence, because I already knew what came next. I finished it for her, my voice low, controlled, but carrying the weight of everything I was finally starting to remember. I built it to forget, and the silence that followed was not empty. It was complete, like something had finally aligned, and in that moment I understood that the door had never been opening to let something in, it had been opening to bring me back to something I had left behind, something that was no longer willing to stay hidden, and something that now stood right in front of me, waiting for me to see it clearly. For a long moment, neither of us moved, and that silence was different from everything that came before. It was not tense, not uncertain, but heavy with something final, like a truth that had finally surfaced and could not be pushed back down again, and I stood there looking at her, not as a stranger anymore, not as a variable I could control or remove, but as the answer to something I had been avoiding for years, something I had buried so deeply that I convinced myself it was gone, and yet, here it was, standing in front of me, steady, unshaken, real, and I felt that memory come into focus, not in fragments anymore, not in distant impressions, but in something clearer, something I could no longer deny. The early days of this place, before it became what it is now, before the systems, before the structure, when it was just an idea, a foundation, a space that was meant to hold something important, something I told myself I would never lose, and I saw it now, the same symbol carved into the original plans, not as decoration, but as a mark, a reminder, something that meant connection, protection, continuity, and I remembered why it was there, not because of me, but because of someone else, someone who had stood in that space before it was finished, someone who had looked at those walls and seen something different than I did, something not built on control but on meaning, and I looked at Emily again. Really looked this time, and the recognition settled fully into place, not sudden, not dramatic, but certain. Like it had always been there waiting for me to accept it, and I spoke her name, slower than before, more deliberate, Emily, and it carried something different now, not authority, not distance, but acknowledgement, and she held my gaze without hesitation, like she had been waiting for that moment. And I took another step closer, not to confront, not to control, but to understand, and I said quietly, "You are not just here, you are part of this." And she did not deny it. She did not look away. She just nodded once, and there was no fear in her, no hesitation, just that same calm certainty that had been there from the beginning, and she said, "And you are supposed to remember." And that sentence landed deeper than anything else, because it was not an accusation, it was a truth, simple, direct, undeniable, and I exhaled slowly, feeling the weight of everything settle into place. Not as something overwhelming, but as something complete, like a circle closing after being left open for too long, and I turned my head slightly, looking back at the door, still open, still silent, and for the first time it did not feel like a disruption. It felt like a resolution, like it had done exactly what it was meant to do, and I understood now that this was never about something breaking through my control. It was about something guiding me back to a part of my life I had chosen to erase, and as I turned back to her, there was no distance left between what I had built and what I had forgotten, only the truth standing in front of me, clear and undeniable, and I said quietly, "Then we do not close it anymore." And her expression shifted just slightly, not surprised, not relieved, but something deeper, something that felt like recognition meeting acceptance, and she nodded again, and in that moment, the door behind us did not move, did not close, did not open, it simply stayed where it was, because it did not need to do anything else. It had already brought me exactly where I was supposed to be.